For those who are tuning in early, this is Radio568. We're broadcasting out of the Windermere Hotel. My name's Alan Winsome. This evening we're going to be speaking with Council Member Helen Rosenthal and be talking about a variety of things, including stabilized rent and the changes in the laws that have happened recently in New York City regarding stabilized rent. I'm going to be bringing Helen into the conversation in a few minutes, and we'll begin promptly at 7 p.m. Hello, Helen, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, Alan.
Hey, how you doing? We are
Good.
We're on line. In fact, we are now broadcasting, and so I'm going to introduce everyone. This is Helen Rosenthal. She is the council member of the the 6th district of New York City,
Yep.
New York City Council, and has been in office since January 1st, 2014. And I welcome you to Radio 568. It's thrilling to have you here and have you online and talking to you here. I'm broadcasting out of the Windermere Hotel. Where are you?
I'm actually in my district office, working a little late before the long weekend. So we're located on Columbus between 87th and 88th, just so your listeners know they can come in anytime.
Great. And they're invited to do that. And this program is basically informational for the Hotel Windermere Tenants Alliance members, though anyone can listen to it, and I'm going to be asking a variety of questions to Helen concerning rent-stabilized laws here in New York City. And I just wanted to begin by asking you briefly, where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? And how did you get into politics? So you got 30 seconds.
Right, exactly. I'll trust me as anyone's story, but I actually grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and came to the East Coast by a graduate school. I have a master's in public health, and my career really has been in public policy. I worked for Mayors Koch, Dinkins, and Giuliani, helping to oversee all the healthcare budgets for the city of New York. So I'm very much a policy and budget wonk. But when I had children, I became more of a community volunteer and was appointed and served on our local community board 7, which is about the same district as my now council district. And I was also very active on the Abortion Rights Action League. So that and 2 children kept me very busy until the time was right. And I am very grateful to the voters of District 6 for electing me to office.
And we're grateful too. You and I had a bit of an extended conversation out on the New York the Central Park, New York Lawn Bowling Club green.
That's right.
You were so gracious to come out there, and you rode out on your bike with your helmet. So you're a big time biker, and obviously, and I would like to get into a number of questions, including your participatory budgeting and other things. But I really want to kind of focus in on what's going on with the rent laws here in the city and what the things that are going to be affecting our tenants here at the Windermere Hotel. So thank you for that.
Terrific.
Yeah.
I'd like to focus on that. Well, you're not, the Windermere is not alone. It's by far, the rent regulation issues are by far the biggest issues that my constituent office deals with. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to dive in.
And you and your group and have been Anna Gago,
Yep, Anna Gago.
who's your housing director, have been so helpful to us. I am on the executive committee of the Hotel Windermere Tenants Alliance, along with Rebecca McKean, my wife, and Melanie Bean. And
Yep.
We were just recently elected in. Nancy Wachs, who you know was the president for many years, and was somewhat of an expert on the rules and that apply to the rent stabilized tenant. And we are just learning, and so I many times go to Nancy to get information. And so a lot of the questions I'm asking are the questions my members are asking, and questions that I need to know too. I just know just enough to maybe ask the right question. So let's start off with a question here.
Great.
The Rent Guideline Board, which is a city, recently passed a ruling that the rent-stabilized rents, both for apartments and for hotel members, would not go up for a period of time. And that was a city ruling, and yay, hooray, hooray for us. And so our rents aren't going to go up. Almost at the same time, the state made a ruling concerning the rent laws and rent stabilization, and decided, and with the wisdom that they had, though late, that rent stabilization would continue in New York State. And I'm so glad they did that, so there's 2 million people can actually stay here in the city. But my question is, where's the turf between the city ruling on rent stabilization and the state ruling on rent stabilization? Where do they have that break?
It's a great question, and again, you're not alone in asking that question either. I would argue that the city should have control over all of these rent regulation issues, but unfortunately, the state has control over our rent regulation laws. The city, through the Rent Guidelines Board, can only set the rent increase rates. So the City Rent Guidelines Board is made up of, I think it's 9 members. Let's see, 2 are tenant reps, 2 are owner reps. It's 8 members and 4 public members. But all of those people are appointed by the mayor of the city of New York. And
so let me just interrupt for a second. So you're saying there's 2 that are actual renters that are on the board.
Yeah.
There are 2 that are representing the landlord, and then there's 4 that are just generally appointed that are neither.
That are public members, correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, good. So there's some evenness there.
And if you're interested, if your listeners are interested, you can actually go to the Rent Guidelines Board website, which has a plethora of information about all of the rules, the rent regulation rules, and they meet on a regular basis, actually, so you can attend their meetings.
And where are those usually held?
So that's a great question. They're trying to, I don't know the answer to that. That's a great question. Go on the website.
I am on the website, and I'm looking, and I'm not finding it right away, but I assume it's there.
Right, but there are tons of housing resources, as you can see, the rules, the rent guidelines, so tenants can really know what their rights are and make sure that that those rights are, that the landlords follow through on what your rights are, as well as the research that the staff does in order to come up with suggestions of what the rent increases should be. So this year, there was a proposal. There were a variety of proposals of what the rent change increases could be, and what the members of the Rent Guidelines Board voted on was a 0% increase for leases that will begin September 15th, 2015, and that would be if someone wanted to renew for 1 year. And if someone wants to renew for 2 years, then they would get a 2% increase in their rent, where it would be locked in 2% increase. And
this is go on. I'm sorry.
Well, what the housing advocates are recommending is to take the 1 year increase of 0. So, and I'm sorry, I got the date wrong. It's October 15th through September 30th. So if your lease comes due before October 1st, you can renew it for 1 year and get the 1% increase, which was last year's renewal rate.
Right.
And then when you renew again next year, you could do the 1 year and get a 0% increase. If your lease gets renewed after October 1st, then again, the recommendation is you do a 1 year lease for 0% increase.
And then how long is this ruling in effect?
It's annual. So next year we're going to see a vote again. And again, there will be 1 year and 2 year rent increases. Or what I would like to see is a rent rollback. Because for many years, the increases have been staggering for the tenants, and I think have put landlords in a solid place to cover their costs.
Right. And the reason I read that the board made a ruling was based on the fact that fuel costs have gone down. Is that the case?
Yep. That's definitely one of the factors that they look at, and they've gone down significantly. So that's right.
And historically, there is a difference in these rent increases or rent decisions based on whether or not we are living in a hotel bill or in an apartment building.
So that piece I actually am less familiar with.
Okay, we don't have to go there.
That's all right. I spent quite a bit of time on the Department of Buildings and the HPD website, and I'm 99.9% sure that Hotel Windermere is a hotel only in name only, and that in fact your certificate of occupancy in 1927 was as a hotel, but now your certificate of occupancy as of 1963 is a residential apartment, is as a residential apartment. So your rates of increase for the rent-regulated tenants, and I know that the numbers have decreased, which is too bad, but is always guided by the Rent Guidelines Board for residents, for rent-stabilized tenants.
That is very interesting, and I'm definitely going to bring that up to our lawyers because we were under a different, we had a different sense about our status.
So I will absolutely qualify that I am not a lawyer. I have a master's in public health, so I could be missing something. But on the city, let's talk about it further. But on the city Department of Buildings website and the HPD's website, it's listed as a residential Class A multiple dwelling unit, which means that you're a residential building.
Okay.
That's important when it comes to this new, what I would call scourge of short-term rental platforms like Airbnb. And I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but I know that there have been violations put on the Windermere because someone tried to rent out units as a hotel, in other words, a short stay, fewer than 30 days, and that is a violation of your certificate of occupancy, and so the building was issued a violation.
Yes, the laws seem to be Byzantine in that it's hard to know exactly what's going on. I do want to talk about the Airbnb phenomenon, but you also you had brought up something else, and you said, that there are fewer and fewer rent-stabilized apartments in the city. But I just want to, and I don't think you're aware of it. I did tell I did mention this to Stephanie, your assistant, that there is an apartment here at the Windermere that just recently was restabilized. There was a court ruling, and it was an apartment on our floor. A long-time mother and a mother and a son who had lived in this apartment for many, many, many years, and they eventually didn't live here. And then the Stellar owners came in and made improvements on the apartments, raised the rent significantly, and the young man who moved in filed for a reduction in his rent because he felt that it was, unfairly destabilized, and the ruling was that it was restabilized. And I wonder
that's great.
Yeah, I wonder if you've heard of any other occurrences like this, of rulings like this in which, previously stabilized apartments are destabilized by the landlord and then restabilized by the court.
No.
Okay.
And that, in my mind, that's like, a miracle and hallelujah and such great news to hear about. I would love to, perhaps offline, learn a lot more about that. I mean, that is a success story, not a frequent story at all. And in fact, we were looking at the Department of Finance website to find the number of rent-regulated units in Windermere and saw that in 2009, the number listed on the Department of Finance website, in other words, the landlord self-reported number, was 293. And when you look at that same website for the 2015, the number of rent-regulated tenants are listed at 208. So net, you guys have had a decrease, a significant decrease. And it's sort of wonderful to hear that that somebody won a case like that.
Yeah, it's also very interesting the fact that our membership is much lower than 200. And so I'm wondering what we, as a Tenants Alliance, where we missed those people who are stabilized but really should be members of our alliance. Yeah.
Or if the landlord is not accurately telling a story.
Yeah. Yeah, which I guess is totally possible. Anyway, these are kinds of minutia things that are important, but we need to look into, and maybe we can talk about a little later. You had also mentioned this Airbnb and the attempt, I'm sure, by many landlords to cash in on the popularity of New York City as a tourist place to go, and the need for more hotel spaces for these tourists. But then as you open up hotel spaces, especially on the Upper West Side, what you're doing is you're taking out apartments that could be rented for people who actually live here.
Exactly.
Exactly right. And so what's the possibility of a building like the Windermere, which we still call the Windermere Hotel, of becoming a hotel in which people can rent for the week, basically tourists. So is that going to happen? Is it possible? What's being done to stop it?
So it's totally illegal for any short-term rental to take place in the Windermere. If a tenant is renting out their apartment on a short-term basis and the tenant is not present, that's illegal, and the tenant risks being automatically, that's a violation of living in the building, and the tenant risks losing their lease. And it doesn't matter if it's a market rate tenant or if it's a rent regulated tenant. It's illegal.
It's interesting because in previous years, and my wife and we raised our children here at the Windermere. Love the Upper West Side, and the fact that we're rent stabilized, we can afford it. But over the years that we've lived here, I have seen people go in and out, and there used to be a time when the former landlord actually did rent by the day.
Well, in 2010, the state passed a law making that totally illegal. So, I don't know what time period you're thinking of.
I'm thinking before then.
So it became distinctly illegal in 2010 when the state passed the multiple dwelling law restricting residential buildings, a multiple, family dwelling unit to rent out like that. Now, when Airbnb and the other short-term rental platforms are just so clever, calling it the sharing economy, and they make it seem like, this easy and wonderful thing to do, if you're in a one or two, in a home that is comprised of one or two families, so a standalone building, home, a single-family home or a two-family built home, then it is legal to rent out your home for fewer than 30 days.
So, for instance, if you own a brownstone, you can rent out rooms in your brownstone.
Absolutely.
Right.
Or if you're, it's a single residency brownstone, right? Not one where there are 10 units, but if it's a single residency. Or, there are a lot of, in freestanding homes in other parts of the city, in Queens, parts of the Bronx, in Brooklyn, that maybe we don't have so much of on the Upper West Side. Similarly, if you're in a building like yours and you stay in your apartment, but rent out a room in your apartment for fewer than 30 days, that is legal also because the tenant is present, and the tenant has to be actively present. But if the tenant is not present, it is illegal. And when the Attorney General did a data scrape from Airbnb, in other words, looked at the rentals that were online at that moment, and this was about 9 months, a year ago, what he found was that of the, I forget the number, something like 35,000 units that were for rent on Airbnb, 2/3 of them were illegal rentals. So 1/3 were legal, so it was maybe a one-family home that was being rented out, and those were fine. And frankly, if Airbnb and the other short-term rental platforms kept it to those units only, I wouldn't have a problem at all with them, and I would be a happy, delighted partner, and be interested in talking to them about next steps with their business model. But Airbnb has been a very disingenuous and certainly not a partner in this endeavor. When the Attorney General pointed out to them 25,000 units that were illegal, they agreed to take down the posting of about 2,000 units. So, hardly even 10%, of the illegal units that are posted on their website now. And, frankly, the city doesn't have any authority to go after Airbnb because it's licensed by the federal government. It's a website platform, so it's licensed by the FCC. Now, the city does have a right to go after a landlord that's illegally renting out units in the landlord's multiple dwelling building, or to go after a tenant illegally renting out their home. And they do that now through the Office of Special Enforcement. And this is important for your listeners both in the building and outside the building to know about. The Office of Special Enforcement will investigate only if there is a request to investigate. So if someone in your building notices that their next door neighbor is clearly renting out their unit as a hotel,
and is not also occupying that apartment in a consistent way.
And is not there, please call 311 immediately, at which point that 311 call will go directly to the Mayor's Office of Special Enforcement, and they will send out investigators. Now, can I continue about the saga?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's kind of questions that have been raised in my head, but please go ahead.
Well, as we had the City Council had a very important hearing about this past February, where we asked the Office of Special Enforcement to come in and testify, and we heard from a representative of Airbnb. And what we learned was that the Office of Special Enforcement, there were a couple of problems. One is that they don't have enough investigators, so that if it's not an emergency investigation like fire or something, they, a fire inside of a room that's an illegal hotel room, if it's a non-emergency complaint, the investigator they send out might arrive a couple days after the hotel guest has already left and the room is vacant again, or the tenant is again present in their own home.
Exactly.
So they're not catching a lot of the people who are breaking the law. And then the other problem is that because it's only a reactive agency, they're not proactively going after all the rentals that are on Airbnb website that are illegal. So given what we had learned, the City Council advocated to double the staffing level and to double the funding of the Office of Special Enforcement, and we actually did get them to nearly double the size of their department. So they've grown now to a $3.2 million group unit of investigators, and they should be able to do a lot more work. And looking forward to working with Liz Glazer, who is the director of that office, to work harder to shut down these illegal hotels. Because, of course, every time this happens, every time a landlord knows they can rent out illegally, the financial incentive is there for them to harass out and eventually evict a tenant so that unit, which had been formerly rent regulated, could now be used as a hotel.
Exactly. That's the point I think that I'm having the biggest problem with is not so much the illegality of it. I mean, certainly there's problems with things being illegal, but it's the fact that there could be, because of this, fewer and fewer units or apartments that could be rented out to people like me, middle-class people, and then there's less opportunity as these apartments are taken over by tourists because they are more financially, viable for the owner, and that's
right.
my fear. Also, if the Stellar management were to make this into a hotel, and from what you're saying, I'm not sure how they can do that, but our lawyers are kind of they're theorizing that might be what they're thinking about, is that it changes the whole tenor or feeling of where we're living. Our home then becomes this kind of place where people are going in and out. We don't know who's there. We don't have neighbors anymore. We've got, we've got people who we don't know, and it becomes less safe. And it's all that. Let's move on. Yeah, go on.
Exactly it. But I would add to that that is the problem now. Mm-hmm. So there's another building where one of the tenants came and testified that their landlord was doing just that. and she is in the situation where she doesn't know her neighbors anymore, and her quality of life is significantly diminished.
Yes.
You know, she has neighbors now who, I mean, not neighbors, but you know, apartments next to her that are being rented out on a nightly basis. Tourists come in, they now have access to the hallways, and you know, who knows who these people are. They could have parties long into the night, and there are no repercussions. And so the quality of life for those tenants significantly diminishes.
Yeah, there is a different kind of management for a hotel, I'm sure. For like a Marriott hotel is going to have a management that's trained to run a hotel, as opposed to a management that's trained and, you know, capable of running an apartment building. You have different skill set.
Not just that, there's very fundamental laws and protections for hotel guests that hotels are required to follow in order to keep the hotel guests safe. For example, in your building, you, as a tenant, as a resident of your building, you probably know where your fire escapes are. And you know, and if you don't, there's supposed to be, and that could be a violation in your building, you know, that someone should call in, but there's supposed to be, you know, very clear markings in the hallways about that.
Right.
But, you know, I'm sure you've noticed as a guest in a hotel, that information is right on the door of your hotel room.
We used to have that. We used to have it, and in fact, there was talk that they were supposed to put that into our rooms. But anyway, yeah. So it's a basic difference.
The protections for hotel guests are very real. And, you know, so the other point of this illegal activity and allowing landlords or tenants to rent out rooms is that the guests coming from somewhere else who don't even know they're participating in an illegal activity don't have the protections they would have if they're in a hotel.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm really not concerned with those people. I'm concerned with my members whose lives would be totally disrupted by transients coming in. And not to say the transients are bad people. It just would disrupt, you know, our community that we have would be disrupted. Listen, let me. There's a few other things I wanted to get to, and it could be. And let's talk Brannick, which is the way I understand it. Brannick is is the law that applies to those people living in an apartment who are not necessarily on the lease, but have been living there for a while. And there was supposed to be a court ruling based in order to kind of clarify what the rights are for that kind of person. But the ruling was a moot, and I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of has gone back and forth with the court, in the courts.
Yeah.
Right? So it's been to the appellate court, and I think, you know, the lawyer who's been on that case representing the tenant actually is the former head of the Goddard Riverside SRO law unit, so which is in our district, and she's terrific. Her name is Marty Weissman, and I think she's preparing now to file court papers again. I'm not exactly up to date on where that is, but that case, go on with your question, because I'm not confident that that case is necessarily relevant to some problems that might be going on at the Windermere.
Well, there's a particular example that I'm going to throw at you of a neighbor of mine who has been here for 20 or more years, and he in the last several years he's been living with someone who is his partner at this point, who I see all the time. And about 2-3 months ago, his partner wrote the rent check and handed it in, and Stellar contacted the original, the person on the lease, who had been there forever, and said, you have to leave because you don't live here anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he said, "Well, no, I live here," and he started paying. He wrote a check then in his name,
Sure.
and has been doing that now for the last 3 months. None of the checks have been processed, and they're continuing to evict him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But this is not the only time this has happened. Stellar seems to use this as I don't know, a technique to get rid of
Sure.
tenants, right? And if Brannick had been ruled, I don't think they could have. In other words, it had been ruled in favor of the tenant who actually does live there, but is not necessarily on the lease. Like my wife. My wife is not on the lease, but we're married.
Sure.
I should get her on the lease, but I'm lazy, and I haven't done it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm not. Can we set Brannick aside for a second?
Sure.
Because I'm not sure that it's related.
Okay.
I'm not as confident about that. Again, a lawyer might know that better.
Okay.
But I can speak to the situation of your friend and his partner, and in terms of you and your wife. There's no doubt in my mind, but your neighbor is being harassed right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if, he should continue he should probably do 4 things. One is he should get a lawyer immediately.
He has.
Who can give him good advice, not the sort of layperson's advice I'm about to give him.
Right.
But
the lawyer he got was the lawyer for the HWTA.
Oh, good. Okay.
Who I think you know who that is.
Okay. So, the most important, it's my understanding, and certainly this is what we tell people who come into our office, you need to do 3 things immediately. One is, for every check that's rejected, to open up an escrow account and put the money in that escrow account so that you will be able to prove to the court that the money is available, that you tried to pay, and that you're not trying to get out of paying your rent, that the money is there. That's critical. And then the second thing is, upon lease renewal, it's my understanding that your friend, I don't know if they're married or not. But,
no, they're not. They're not married. As far as I know, they're not married. Yeah.
So I don't exactly know what the qualifying document would be.
Mm-hmm.
But if we could talk about you and your wife for 1 second.
Sure, that's a little clearer.
So right now, I would guess you're in your lease may or may not be due. But if it's not due immediately, we're in the month of June. The next month, when it comes up for renewal, at that point is when you would send in a copy of your marriage certificate and evidence of the fact that your wife lives with you, maybe a joint checking account with the same address or photographs, something of that nature that shows her living there. And at that point, the landlord is required to add her name to the lease. That has to happen because if it is very difficult, if something, God forbid, should happen to you, it would be more of a challenge for your wife to continue to live there because her name would not be on the lease. It would be a court battle. And I did just hear of a case today where that exact thing happened, and it took a year of a court case, but the woman finally did get her name on the lease by using all this proof that she has been living with her husband for years. But the rule is that the 2 names must be on the lease for at least 2 years before that new person on the lease has succession rights.
Isn't that interesting? 2 years.
So you want to cross your T's and dot your I's as much as possible. I'm guessing that in New York State, which is an incredibly, friendly to partner, situation state, there must be proxy things that could be submitted to the landlord, and I'm sure your friend's lawyer would know what those are. But upon lease renewal, he absolutely should do it so both people's names are on the lease. And that's true for children as well. You know, if you're expecting your child to inherit your apartment, they have to live there in order for at least 2 years and get their name on the lease.
Wow. I totally had a misconception about that. I thought it was maybe like 6 months or something, but it has to be 2 years. Interesting. That's great. It's great to know that. And these kinds of questions, of course, our tenants, your constituency can contact your office. And
yeah, and this type of situation is a common one. We get this question all the time. Which is why we're so fast to say, you know, upon lease renewal, get your partner or your spouse's name on the lease, and it's easy to do, and it's your right to do that. People can come into my office anytime and get a referral for a lawyer. We also have a housing clinic once a month, the first Wednesday of every month, where there are about maybe 7 or 8 lawyers who are free to anyone who comes in and lives in the district and has a question for a lawyer. We don't run those clinics in the summer. They'll start up again in September.
And so if they wanted to send an email with a question, can they send it to Anna?
Absolutely. So send it to her name, which is first initial and then last name.
Right,
so
AGAGO.
Yes, at council.nyc.gov.
Right. So it's AGAGO at council, COUNCIL, .nyc.gov.
Yes, and similarly, if anyone has a question for me, they can reach me at the same type of address, Rosenthal at council.nyc.gov.
Right. Let's move on to something else. Are you okay with time?
Yeah, I'm up for it. I'm hoping you're going to move to seniors and SCREE.
Yeah. Why don't we
Or we can talk about something else.
No, let's talk about SCREE, which
Okay.
deals with seniors, yes?
Yes.
Right. My question is this, and I don't know if it's relevant or not, but we'll start here, and then you could take it where you want to. It seems to me that the way the SCREE laws are set up, and the SCREE laws basically, the way I understand it, is a way for a senior, someone 62 years or older, to lock in a rent-stabilized rent for the rest of their life at whatever level they're at. But they can only get a SCREE, under SCREE, if their rent is at least 1/3 of their annual income. Now, it seems to me that's a lot. So if my rent is $1,000, it's like, how much do I have to make each year, or my income, in order to pay that 1/3 rent? And I had a case where one of our tenants didn't fulfill the SCREE because of that. He had the age and all, and he didn't make that much money. But it was
What year was this?
This was just recently. Okay. He didn't make that much money, something, $40,000 or something a year for a single person.
The reason I ask when this was is because the law actually just changed.
Okay, tell us about it.
Yeah, the state has increased the income cap from $29,000 to $50,000 a year.
Okay, all right, but you still need to pay. But 1/3 of that.
Right. So here's how it works, and I'm going to try saying it the way I understand it.
Yes. And
let me know if it's the same as because I think it's a little different than the way you just described.
Hey, I could be wrong.
The way SCREE works is if you are a rent-regulated tenant and you're over 62 or you're a person with disabilities, then you can apply for SCREE. And what SCREE does is, yes, lock in your rent at whatever level it is when you apply for SCREE. And at no time can the rent be increased to be over 1/3 of the income level, which might be benefits when you're 62 or, your job or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But to the extent that your rent might, 1 year with the rent renewal, let's say it goes up so that, let's do an easy example for a second.
Okay.
Let's say that your income from all different sources is $36,000 a year.
Okay. Not an awful lot of money.
Not an awful lot of money.
Right, but something you could live on as a single person. Okay.
Right. So if your rent is $1,000 a month in your rent-regulated home,
right.
So 12 times 1,000 is $12,000,
which is 1/3 of 36,000.
Which is 1/3, right? Now let's say there's a rent renewal, and you go. Let's just pretend, because I wouldn't recommend this at all, but you sign a 2-year lease in the current situation, which would increase your rent by
2%.
2%, which would bring it over the 1/3 of your income, right? At that point, you as an individual, as a tenant, would not have to pay the increase. The government would pick up that increase.
So the government picks up
the
increase.
The government picks it up. The landlord is made whole. The rent-regulated landlord
right.
Is made whole for the increase, and the tenant doesn't have to pay more than 1/3 of their income in rent.
Right. Okay. But if your rent is, say, which happens because many of our members have been living in their apartments for many, many years, decades, and their rent is lower. So they're making $36,000, but their rent is maybe, I'll give a reasonable, like $700 a month, right?
Sure.
They couldn't apply for SCREE.
Well, you can apply. You should apply.
Yeah.
And what it means is that your rent would be, could never go up to more than 1/3. Or you could apply, but you wouldn't qualify for it because your rent isn't even 1/3
right.
of your income.
Right.
I'm sorry, I misspoke at first.
Right.
Yeah, you wouldn't qualify until your rent was 1/3 of your income.
Right. So that person who's making $36,000 a year with $700 a month rent could not then lock it in at $700. They'd have to wait
Correct.
for it to rise to that 1/3. Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, let's use a different example. A tenant who's maybe paying $1,500 a month or $2,000 a month, is still a rent-regulated tenant, and they make, again, the $36,000 or $40,000 and are 62. They could sign up and qualify for SCREE, but the rent would be frozen at whatever level it's currently at, even though it would be more than 1/3.
Right. Okay.
And one piece of legislation that I support, and Senator Kavanaugh, the state has tried to push it, but not successfully yet, is to have a rollback for those tenants.
Great. For anyone listening, this is Radio 568. I have to start remembering to give the station number here. And we're talking with Council Member Helen Rosenthal about rent law here in New York City. My name is Alan Winson. I'm a professor at John Jay College in Media Studies in the English Department. And I wondered, we've been talking about SCREE and a lot of other different things about restabilization of apartments, or at least one that we know of. Can we talk, was there anything else about SCREE that you wanted to mention?
No, except that people should, if they haven't qualified in the past, like your friend, because they made over the $29,000 cap, please come back and reapply. The cap is now $50,000, and you can come into my office and we can help you with that.
Great. Okay.
Interestingly, in this district, we are on the list for both the most number of people who have signed up for SCREE, but we're also on the list of among the most number of people who are eligible for SCREE but have not signed up. So I'm always encouraging people to check in and see if they're qualified and to sign up.
Right. I think that's a phenomenon of New York City. We're always the most and the least.
Right, exactly.
Somehow, I think you can apply that to a lot of different things. So anyway, I want to talk about MCIs. You seem to know so much about so many different things, but there was one important question that we had. We've had major capital improvements, MCIs, by the owner of the Windermere Hotel over the years since they've taken over, and allowed them then to charge very high rents on the refurbished apartments, sometimes combining one bedroom, another bedroom, and so they have 3 or 4 bedroom apartments and can charge quite a bit of rent for them, going market rate. But any improvements that are made, like to the common area, whoever's living here has to eventually pay for that if the Department of Housing allows the MCI to go through. And it's right now our lawyers and the Hotel Windermere Tenants Alliance is kind of getting ready to make that fight in order to keep those MCIs as low as possible so our rents won't go up. The question I have to ask is, in the recent passage of the rent laws in the state, there was an attempt to change the MCI law so that it doesn't ratchet up to the point where the MCIs is paid for, the landlord gets his money back, but yet the rents do not go down. They just ratchet up and then they stay there. And it seems to me there was a part of the bill that didn't pass was that the rents would then revert back to where they were before the MCI started. I wondered if you know anything about that, or is that going to ever happen? And what is your position on that?
Well, this one you nailed totally. So, again, this is something that the state controls. Unfortunately, the city cannot control its own rent laws. We don't have home rule. So the state determines what the rules are around major capital improvements, the MCIs, or vacancy decontrol, in other words, how much rent, is being paid for an apartment before, after which the landlord can take it out of rent regulation. And unfortunately, we fought very hard for the tenant advocate groups fought very hard to make it, as you described, so that when an MCI is imposed, it would end as soon as the landlord got back the full amount of the cost. A perfect example is a boiler. They're expensive, but not terribly expensive, and so it should take just a few years to pay it off. But unfortunately, the state legislators did not end up voting on the side of tenants on this one, and they will continue to place this unfair burden on tenants. So this was a big loss for tenants this go around.
It's my sense. You go on.
I would add to that yes, it's great that the rent laws were extended for 4 more years. Yes, it's great, that we have the rent laws. There's no doubt about that. But actually extending them by 4 years is politically, in terms of political strategy for getting better rent laws, it doesn't really help us because 4 years from now, again, Cuomo will have been elected again, and he can, again, disingenuously say, oh, I will help tenants, when he really obviously did not do that this time round. So it was a purposeful extension of 4 years. I would have preferred a 1-year extension so that we could have made rent laws a political issue and really force our legislators' feet to the fire to respond to the 2.5 million residents in New York City that live with these rent laws.
Yeah.
And then we could have, fought a good fight again, during this upcoming year and through the electoral process. But we've lost that opportunity. The governor made it so that it's a 4-year extension. And, it could sound good. I see how he pitches it, that it's great because you can be rest assured your rent protections are safe. They're weakened rent protections. So, it's all how you spin it.
Yeah, it's not really a celebration. It's very interesting how you put it, because we're locked in now, and any kind of positive changes that, as you said, that might be possible with a more maybe Democratic Congress or maybe a teach out as governor. We could start moving to something that's a little more progressive.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and a little, yeah. Can you talk at all to the C violation, which really is something that impacts the MCI?
Right. So it's a very important thing. It's great. So the MCI cannot be approved by the state DHCR until there are no C violations in the building. So they, and as you know, I'm sure, the C violations are those that could cause immediate hazardous situation, like a blocked fire egress, mold in an apartment, defective elevators. And fortunately,
what about rats?
Yep, that can count as a C violation.
Okay.
And as I look on the website, hang on one second. I may have clicked off it. I think your building has 5 C violations, and the most recent was called in, I think, this week. So you want to keep calling those in. And currently, I'm seeing about 50 violations, HPD violations, ranging from like a broken mailbox, which is not a C violation, but leaking ceilings, that's absolutely a C violation. And all those violations have to be cleared before DHCR can approve the landlord's application.
So a recent leak that went from the 7th floor down to the basically the basement in the Windermere would be a C violation.
Yes.
Right. We just had
and
one.
Have you been calling those in? And you should call those in. You can call them into 311.
Right. We've been urging our members to use 311 prodigiously on anything that they see that is maybe untoward. Thank you. That's very good. I'm almost at the end of my list here of things I want to talk about. De Blasio, our mayor, has recently taken on the poor door buildings and and limiting access to public areas to people who are rent stabilized. And where are you on that?
Well, I've been a very vocal opponent of the separate entrances. I actually find the expression poor door offensive.
Oh, yeah.
We're not, so I don't use it.
Okay.
Because we're talking about working people. We're not talking, the specter of a poor door is one of a homeless person.
Yeah.
And that's not the situation. We're talking about working people who who are getting by, for a family of 4, maybe 80,000 a year, 60 or 80,000. And, they have had to, because developers have found a loophole in the zoning code, they have to suffer the indignity of walking in a separate entrance. And I think that's just morally reprehensible. I'm not a fan. And while, it is the case that the most important thing is that we get more affordable housing, I don't see any need to have two separate entrances. So that is something that I've been vocal about, and that issue we won on in the state, and the state in passing one of their rules said that there cannot be separate entrances. So they have closed that loophole. And going forward, developers can't do that. But right around us, at 40 Riverside Boulevard, over in Riverside South, and then just south of that at Riverside Center, those buildings will have separate entrances for the rent-regulated tenants, ostensibly, and market-rate tenants.
Interesting. It seems very related to a situation that's going on here at the Windermere, but also at other places, and that is there are certain amenities that are denied our members, amenities that they've had all their lives living here, but that now they can't go up on the roof. The roof. It's
unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I've heard that, now there's a special access card that you have to have. The other problem with that isn't that one of the fire exits?
We looked at it. This was under Nancy Walk's regime when she was head of the Hotel Windermere Tennis Alliance.
Okay.
And they worked that out and had worked with the fire marshal on that. And there is accessibility to the roof in the case of fire. But in all other situations, if I want to take my family up to the roof to look at the fireworks, as we've done in many, many, many years past, we can't anymore because we don't have the card that we can pass across the sensitive thing on the elevator, the sensor reader on the elevator that takes us up to the 23rd floor, and then we can't get up onto the roof. Seems very unfair.
I find that disturbing. And can I ask you, in your lawyer's review of the MCIs, I hope that you won't be charged for those renovations.
I don't think so. I don't think
right,
so.
To the extent that they've made these beautiful renovations and you're not getting access and you would be charged, that would be quite insulting.
Yeah, I don't.
I hope illegal. Now, I know that our public advocate, Tish James, has been vocally opposed to this as well, and she might have a lawsuit on it and specifically, I think she was looking at the Stonehenge, which is on 97th and Columbus. Mm-hmm. It's not in my district, so I'm less familiar with it, but people I would check in with the public advocate on that one. I think she has brought them to court.
Okay. I wanted to congratulate you on your participatory budgeting initiative. And I think it was really great. And I wanted, can you tell us, of all the winners, which one is your favorite? Maybe you can mention some of the others.
Sure. Well, I'm glad to know. I hope your building is familiar with this. And, of course, I should use this opportunity to encourage people to sign up for my emails, which you can do on helenrosenthal.com. And you will get the information about participatory budgeting, where I've turned over $1 million in capital funds for the residents of this district to decide what we should fund them on. And this year was our first year, and over 2,200 people came out to vote.
Yes, I voted. I found you out on the 72nd Street in the island out there by the subway island, and you were out there very busily pulling people in to vote, and I was one of them.
Great. We had pop-up voting locations, so we did have a lot of people that way. 4 projects of the 15 won. One that came in first place was the mobile food pantry van for the West Side Campaign Against Hunger. They're a terrific food pantry that treats their clients with great respect, and they'll be turning that type of respect-based service now onto a van, which is very exciting. The Hudson Greenway is going to get some bike safety improvements in Riverside Park, and that's the area right in front of the boat basin,
Yep.
where if you're walking down there or riding your bike, it's always such a, it's so congested for anyone. I'm very excited that one won.
We are both bike riders, and the bike riders' experience of the city, I'm sure, is very different than the car riders' experience or the pedestrians' riders. And yeah, there are places right along that greenway that is almost more dangerous than riding in the street.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be so cautious there.
So cautious.
But now we'll get some really good, well thought out, clear signaling of where everyone should be. So it'll become safer. And I'm excited for DOT, their street safety smarts on that. And then also the crosstown bus countdown clock.
This is great. I love this one. This is wonderful. Yeah.
I think they've,
it's like what they have on the subway.
Soon. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then MLK High School, Martin Luther King High School.
Oh, this is also great. I love it.
Yeah, they have great soccer teams. So we're going to fund getting them a turf right in an empty courtyard that's not used so much.
Which courtyard is that, and how close is it to the school?
It's just behind. It's on the school property. It's just behind. They use it sometimes now during the summer as a cafeteria space for kids to go out on.
Okay.
But everyone in the school agreed and voted. All the principals voted and agreed to turn it over to a turf for the kids to use to practice.
And it's big enough for a full-size soccer field?
No, not at all. It's only practice. It's practice field.
Okay, fantastic.
So it's exciting, and I'm excited, for next year. Alan, if you're interested, we're now developing and nurturing our new team our new steering committee that will oversee implementation of participatory budgeting in our district. This is totally, the whole process is run by the residents, volunteers who are residents. Our office provides guidance and materials, but we really have nothing to do with it at all. All the suggestions come from residents, the neighborhood assemblies where we talk about it. It's all run by volunteers who try to get the word out to the largest community possible. And
citizen power.
There are people in your building, or if you would like to volunteer to help out, I would welcome that. We meet on the first Wednesday of every month, and you can find out about that on my website too.
Okay. There's so much other stuff that I want to talk about. There's more I want to ask you about biking in the city. It's very important to me. I also wanted to talk about the new roadways in order to create less fatalities, but those are topics that I think we're kind of ran out of our hour, and maybe we can do this again. If you've enjoyed it, I've enjoyed it.
I would love to come back.
Okay, great. It seems to have worked out quite well. This is Radio 568. We generally come out of John Jay College, part of the Media Studies course at John Jay College in the English department. We're expanding. We're finding new programming, and we are also accessible through Twitter at Radio568JJ. That's at Radio568JJ. You certainly can leave your comments there as to whether you enjoyed this program. And Helen, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Terrific. I look forward as well. Have a great 4th of July. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.